have Rabbi Dr. Reichman. Rabbi Dr. Reichman received his MD from Albert Einstein College of Medicine and a smicha from Rabbi Isaac Alfano Theological Seminary at Yeshiva University, commonly known as REITs. He's a professor and attending physician Department of Emergency Medicine and a professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Population Health at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He has been the recipient of 6 different awards, spanning from the Tensor Award for Excellence in Biology. All right, Rabbi Dr. Reichman.
First of all, there's handouts for everybody on the table. Please grab a handout. It's a tremendous honor. It's supposed for me to be here to speak to all of you. I cannot tell you how much music I get by when I walked in and I said, how many people would be attending such an event on Sunday evening? So when I walked across through the windows and I saw that it was a packed house, I was extraordinarily impressed and honestly enthused. I've been in the world of medical alone for a number of decades already, and I never cease to be amazed at the energy of people involved in these continuous organizations. The organizations that I see behind me are amazing. Touro College, of course, established institution, but some of them are very new. So you see JOMA, for example. How many people have a representative here for JOMA? Anybody know what it is? JOMA is just a handful of years, 5 years old maybe, JOMA. I'm extraordinarily impressed with JOMA. They've accomplished more in their short lifetime than the organizations that are far, far older have accomplished. And I think the whole Jewish community owes them a debt of gratitude for what they've done during the pandemic and continue to do. And of course, Beis Medrash Kabbalah, which we are here to launch this extraordinary program. I'm a big fan of this curriculum. I'm a big fan of this program. I'm one of the many people that receive Rabbi Sprung's weekly halacha, and I make sure to read it every week. It comes both in the English version and the Hebrew version. They're actually asynchronous for those of you who get the email. So the English and the Hebrew aren't the same; they're different. If you want to get a taste of two different topics, and also the program that he started. In Eretz Yisrael, the dual curriculum of both a medical school and a yeshiva is actually a historical first. And I spent some time researching this, as you'll see in my brief presentation this evening as we share some fascinating historical chapters. My particular interest is the relationship of Judaism and medicine throughout history. And in all of history, there have been many, many people who have tried to have curricula of halacha and Jewish studies and science and medicine. Never, ever before has a Jewish and medical curriculum been integrated, a formal Jewish and a formal medical curriculum been integrated, such that you can attend a medical school, decelerate the medical school, and achieve and accomplish great goals in the world of halacha at the same time get your bona fide medical degree. So that's a true historical first in all of our Jewish history. How many of us here are medical students? So the lion's share of you are medical students. Excellent. So I think you will particularly appreciate many of the things we're going to discuss over the next few moments. I begin actually, this is not a medical student, but I just begin historically from the 15th century. And my objective really, taking off from what Rabbi Sprung talked about on the Mesiras Nefesh, Moser Nefesh Mechayim. My perspective, my objective here, my entire objective, is to give us a little perspective. We are sitting here together, openly practicing medicine as free Jews in institutions across the country, across the globe. Many of us having access to kosher food, many of us having opportunities to even have institutions that have Shabbos observance. Suffice it to say that our ancestors had nothing remotely resembling the opportunities that we have today. And I'm just going to share with you a few fascinating tidbits of what it was like for our previous predecessors in terms of the practice of medicine and the efforts that they went to be frum, to practice medicine in a world which was not as accepting of religious observance as it is today. And one example I start with is back in the 15th century in England. So who knows when the Jews were kicked out of England?
1290.
1290. Does anybody read Henry IV in Shakespeare? Shakespeare's Henry IV? A few. Henry IV himself was sick, and nobody in England could cure him. So he called for a specifically Jewish physician to take care of him, Elio Sabato. And when he called for Elio Sabato lived in Italy. So he told King Henry IV, yes, I'd be happy to come take care of you, but I have one proviso. And if you look on your handout, you'll see to the right of King Henry IV a copy of the original decree allowing Elio Sabato to do the following thing. And it used to be, and I profess, my father-in-law, Shalom, was an expert in Latin. I am not an expert in Latin. But it used to be that when you trained in medicine, you had to train in Latin. You have to know Latin in order to graduate medical school. So if you look in the left-hand side, you'll see a small excerpt. And it said, on the bottom two lines, cum decim omnibus servientibus. Anyone want to take a wild guess what that might mean in the entire world? So let me give you a hint. The word decem is a number. What number do you think that might be? 10. That's the number 10. So what did Elio Sabato say? Elio Sabato told King Henry IV, I will only come to treat you in England if I'm allowed to bring 10 men with me. Why do you think he wanted to bring 10 men with him? He needed a minion. And he asked Henry IV, now why couldn't he get a minion in England? There wasn't a Jew in England. He couldn't make a minion in England. There wasn't a professed Jew. Surely there were Jews in England. There wasn't a professed Jew in England. So he said, I will only come on the proviso that I'm allowed to bring 10 men with me. So I always ask myself, why did he need 10? He just needed another 9. So my story is, and I'm open to other suggestions, my thought was the reason he needed the 10th is because he would probably be called the king for most of his days. So he'd leave his poor fellows without a minion, so he figured he'd bring a full minion with him, so if he's away at the king's palace, they would be able to make a minion. But moving on to the generations of the centuries of our predecessors who were students, who had challenges, I'll share with you the biography of Yehuda Gonzaga, which is number 2 on our handout, who was a student in Italy in 1700. And this, if you read with me, you'll see in the top sentence, then new difficulties arose. First, it was necessary to obtain papal permission. What does that mean? So what that means is the following. You all apply to medical school. I mean, I don't know if it's one application, multiple applications these days. You apply to medical school freely. You can apply to any school you want. You hope you get the interview at the schools you want. If you're your second, third, fifth choice, as long as you get into medical school, it's fantastic. If you were a Jew, your exact age, living in 1700 Italy, and you wanted to attend medical school, the only way you could get into a formal university medical training was to get permission from the Pope himself. Because all Jews were prohibited from attending universities. And it was papal decree that was reinforced generation after generation. So this poor Yehuda Gonzaga, in order to get his medical school training, had to get permission from the Pope. And after he got permission from the Pope, he was able to attend Sapienza University, which is the University of Rome. And then he records for us that it wasn't even easy for people to give exams. You had to approach every professor to get your exams. And some of the professors said, well, I gave an exam to a Jew last year. Why should I give an exam to a Jew this year? And then he further writes that one of his exams was on Rosh Hashanah. His final exam was on Rosh Hashanah. And he writes, on the very last paragraph, he passed very satisfactory examinations before each of the examiners. This last examination was held on the day of the Jewish New Year. He tells how he attended early service, left the synagogue after Shacharis, went before the examiners, passed through the ordeal, and returned to service in time to hear the shofar blown. Having fulfilled all requirements, he was ready to receive his degree. This is Mesiras Nefesh of an Italian Jewish student back in the 1700s. To the left, you see these two excerpts, small excerpts of 2 letters. Which are a remarkable letter exchange between 2 students in universities in Germany. It's number 3. We're not going to read that inside. They're lengthy letters. that two students in Germany, one at the University of Frankfurt, one at the University of Halle, they were each the only Jewish student at their university. And one student wrote to the other, said, I am absolutely miserable. I don't have anybody I can talk to, anybody I can relate to. People here are not very friendly to the Jews. I understand that you are the only student at your university. Why don't you transfer to me? This is 1700s in Germany. Why don't you transfer to me? We can learn together, we can daven together, we can study medicine together, b'chavrusa. Imagine how amazing that would be. And what did the student respond? The student responded, first of all, just to read the letters, you'll be embarrassed at how ignorant you are, because they're mastering the Hebrew language, they're writing to each other in Hebrew. It's absolutely extraordinary. But the other student writes, first of all, I am honored at your letter. I am amazed that you think of me to write to me. And he says, I'm sorry that your situation is so difficult. I am having an amazing time at the University of Halle. It is so amazing here. I am connected to Professor Hoffman. Professor Hoffman was one of the premier professors in the entire world. He was the university professor at the University of Halle. He was a Ben Bayis by Hoffman. He was a Mufakir professor. Hoffman wasn't Jewish, wasn't a Jewish professor. Also, I'm allowed to carry a sword, which Jews were not allowed to carry a sword. And we don't know what the exchange after that was. He actually invited the student to come to him. I don't know if he actually made that move or not. And then on the bottom, you have an example of a student, again, the only student in his university in Göttingen, in a German city in the 1700s, who was taking anatomy. Do you guys, how many of you have taken anatomy so far? So some of you have taken anatomy. Is anatomy still full anatomy? It's six-month course? How long is it now? 3 months. Wow. I think it was a year course when I took it. 4 months. Wow, okay. And pretty soon there probably won't be any actual anatomy, it'll probably be all virtual anatomy. That's going to be discussion. So this young student, Benjamin Wolf Ginsberger, the only Jewish student at his university, wrote a shaila to one of the postmen of his generation about whether he could participate in anatomy lab on Shabbos when there weren't any bodies for dissection and they did dog dissection instead. And who was the posting that he wrote to? Rabbi Yaakov Emden. He wrote to Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and this is a small excerpt from the Chuba on the bottom of this page, number 4. He writes, anybody who wants to practice medicine has to study Chachmas Hanituach. What's Chachmas Hanituach? Surgery is the modern expression. Nituach is anatomy. Chachmas Hanituach is anatomical dissection. For another discussion, anatomical dissection, actually, we'll turn the page, we'll see in a moment when anatomical dissection was introduced. This very student had to write a dissertation to complete medical school. And I'm sorry I'm asking all these questions because it's fun for me. How many of you in medical school have to write a dissertation to complete the medical training? Any of you? No. So Einstein still has a dissertation. Some others have maybe like a research paper, an extra research paper. Some people still have that. So in the pre-modern era, everybody has to write a dissertation. So this young student had to write a dissertation in a university in Germany. What did he write about? Top front page of his dissertation is on the bottom left-hand side. Medicinam ex Talmudicus. His dissertation in 1743 in Germany was on medicine in the Talmud. And for those of you who read Latin, I can happily send you a copy of the dissertation. For those of you who don't read Latin, it's actually been translated into English, so I can send you an English version of the dissertation. So this is Mesiras Nefesh. This is a frum person. Just like now, we're going to talk about a curriculum in halacha in the practice of medicine. 200 years ago, or 250 years ago, Jews also wanted to study halacha, wanted to study medicine, wanted to connect to the Talmud in their practice of medicine. After Descartes, he wrote his medical school dissertation and such. So I happen to work at Einstein, and I mentor electives in medical halacha in the 4th year. And I also mentor ISP, which is basically a thesis. And I've mentored probably 60, 70 on medical halachic topics over the years. This is really a continuation of the same theme of the generation. So if you think anything you're doing is new, in many ways it is new, but in many ways it's a continuation of the same thing exact same students of your age have been doing for generation after generation. And now just be another 5 minutes and we'll share with you some other fascinating things on the next page. If you turn to the next page, so I alluded to this tshuva about anatomy. Now when did anatomy become part of medical training? So you would think, well, Hippocrates clearly knew anatomy. Galen, the 2nd century, the Common Era, contemporary of Yehuda Nasi, surely knew about anatomy. Surely they did dissection of the human bodies. Well, the truth is, that's not the case. With the exception of a small period of time in Alexandria in Egypt, in the modern era, maybe 2nd, 3rd century before the Common Era, there was no human dissection systematically as part of medical training. So if you became a doctor, you didn't really dissect bodies. Occasionally there would be a criminal whose body would be dissected. There would be a public dissection, who would watch the dissection and maybe learn from that dissection. And as a result, by the way, Galen, whose works were used for 1,500 years, had many errors because it was based on animal anatomy. So those errors were not corrected until the time of this person on the upper left-hand corner, who founded modern anatomy, and his name was Andreas Vesalius. Andreas Vesalius lived in Italy and taught. He was a professor of anatomy at a university called the University of Padua. Now, I have a particular affinity for the University of Padua. The reason I have a particular affinity for the University of Padua is because Padua was the very first university to allow Jewish students to attend. No other university in history, because of the Catholic decrees, allowed Jewish students to attend. Padua, despite its proximity to the Vatican, was a separate state, part of a separate Venetian state, and as a result, they had the ability to accept Jewish students. So sometime in the early 1500s, they for the first time accepted Jewish students. So what happened as a result is hundreds of Jewish students from all over mostly Europe, who wanted to train in medicine for the first time had an opportunity to train in a real university as opposed to training by apprenticeship. So they literally came from all over the place with tremendous excitement. And this wasn't a community college, University of Padua. The people that taught at University of Padua, you may have heard of some of these people before. Copernicus taught at the University of Padua. Galileo taught at the University of Padua. William Harvey taught at the university, as he actually graduated from the University of Padua. So you had these Jews walking into basically the Harvard of Europe, coming from where? Coming from the shtetl, literally coming from Poland, coming from Germany, obviously many coming from Italy, but they didn't speak the language. They didn't speak Italian, and much of the discourse was in Latin, and Vesalius' work was in Latin. So if you look on the right-hand side, right next to the work of Vesalius, you will find an absolutely remarkable artifact. It is a page of a work, which is a translation of the work of Vesalius in the Yiddish language. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there is a Yiddish version of Vesalius. And for those of you who have a desire to read this, it is actually digitized online. The original is housed at the University of Pennsylvania. It's about 400 pages long. But imagine people, you can imagine this, we can all imagine this. You got two Jews sitting in the back seat of Vesalius' class, not understanding a word of what he's saying, leafing through this Yiddish version, saying, yeah, this must be what he's talking about. I think this is what he's talking about. And in fact, there were schools, and you can imagine this also, there were people who lived in Italy who helped acclimate the Jews coming from Poland and Germany, coming to Italy who couldn't speak the language. They brought them into their homes, they gave them kosher food, they set up a base medrash for them, they set up a place for them to learn to daven, and they taught them the tools they needed to matriculate into the University of Padua and other similar universities. And that's exactly the kind of things that we Jews would do for each other at any stage. And again, this is amazing. We're talking 1600s, 1700s, many, many hundreds of years ago. And in fact, there was such excitement about the Jews of Italy, in Italy, for Jews graduating medical school, that they even wrote special poetry for Jewish medical students who graduated the University of Padua. So for those of you who studied the Renaissance at all, you will know that poetry was an integral part of the Renaissance. They wrote poetry for everything. They wrote poetry, and the Jews also wrote poetry for everything. For marriages, for funerals, for keynotes, for funerals, for brisson, for Pidyon Ben, for Siyum Hashas, for Siyum Masechta, they didn't get Siyum Hashas back then, for Siyum Masechta, etc., etc. There was a special genre of poems for Jewish graduates of the University of Padua. And if you look in the upper right-hand side, this is an example of one of those poems. They were printed on like you go to Eretz Yisrael, see these pashkevilim that they put up on the walls? They're printed on these little pashkevilim-like things. And guess who, for example, was very connected to medical students and wrote poetry for a number of medical students? If you look in the very center of this page, Shir L'Chorot Elia Consili. This is a poem or sonnet in honor of Elia Consili, and who wrote it? Misalim B'Havaso, Moshe Chaim Yaakov Chai Vutzato. Who is that? That's the Ramchal. The famous Ramchal, whose works we are reading today, was very connected to the University of Padua. We actually have record of his matriculation at the University of Padua. He didn't graduate, but he attended for the University of Padua. Many of his greatest Talmidim were students at the medical school. And Sprung is hoping to continue that tradition of having many of his greatest Talmidim, people that attend the medical school. They're the ones who sat in front of his class. They're the ones who perpetuated his teachings. And if you look at the very bottom of this, we'll close, what you see is another example of how Jews attended the medical school and accommodations for Jews in the medical school. The bottom left-hand side, you see actually a copy of a diploma. This is a diploma of a Jewish medical student whose Hebrew name was Gershon Tilke. Now, most of you are students here, but for those of us who are still here that have graduate diplomas in medicine, so you have a graduate diploma in medicine. My diploma doesn't look anything like this. This was truly, I wish I could show you what it looks like in living color. And actually, I'll share with you at another time, I've spent a number of years trying to track down diplomas of Jewish medical students from the University of Padua. I've actually found 19 diplomas in collections all across the globe. They're spectacular works of art. But what's more amazing than that, it's not their artistic value, it's their religious value. If you look in the bottom right-hand side, it says, in Dei Eternae Nomine, Amen. The headline of the diploma is, in Dei Eternae, in the name of the eternal God. William Harvey's diploma, from roughly the same years, said, in the name of Yashke. And that was the standard diploma. So the university changed it for the Jew. And they said, because imagine a Jew bringing his diploma back home to his mother. I mean, imagine a student coming to his mother. Said, Mom, you're not going to believe this. I finally graduated. You know, bring it back. You're not going to. Here's my diploma to hang up on the wall, and it says in the name of Yeshke. You know, mother wouldn't be very happy. And there's actually a black hat on the bottom left-hand side. Art Scroll did not put that black hat in there, so don't worry. That actually is these little putti, or little angels, reflect the graduation ceremony that they did at that time, where they bestowed, they actually put a ring on the graduate, they opened books and closed books to represent the transmission of knowledge, and they put a special hat on top of the graduate's head as well. So we got a chance to very, very briefly, just to give you some fascinating chapters in the history of medicine. What's the take-home point? What's the message here? The message here is that we are sitting here in a room filled mostly with medical students that are now beginning their career. And you might think, you know, we're new medical students in the 21st century. You know, how long have Jews really been integrating medicine and their religion, medicine and Torah? You know, we're hearing about an extraordinary curriculum. You know, maybe we're the first ones to do this. So the truth of the matter is, I hope you will realize that you are not even remotely the first people to do this. There have been hundreds and hundreds of years, and I didn't even go back farther. We can go back to the Middle Ages and also find the Jews that were most nefesh. Amazing stories, you know, of physicians who served kings and queens, and the tshuva that I'm sure my sprung knows, the tshuva of Eliel Montalto, who was a physician who served a queen in Paris And he wrote that he actually himself wrote a tshuva about how he could go there on Shabbos, because he was and take a carriage, which was a new thing at that time, a new carriage on Shabbos. But in any case, that is why I am enthused specifically to be here this evening, because I fully understand and appreciate that what is going on here is part of a continuum. That every single person in this room is continuing the Masorah of our ancestors who had a fascination of refuah, which is something which the Gedolim, generation after generation, said was one of the greatest professions for a Jew to do is refuah. And you have accepted that position, that profession upon yourselves. But don't think that just because you've accepted the position of refuah, that it means you can abandon your religion in the pursuit of that refuah. Quite the contrary, you will see that there's tremendous precedent for many, many students before you who not only became extraordinary physicians to kings and princes and presidents, but also worked very hard to maintain their Masorah, to maintain their tradition, maintain their connection. You have that opportunity to learn a curriculum to continue your Masorah, to continue that chain of Masorah. And I wish you all continued hatzlacha and success in your future careers.